America's involvement in the Middle East didn't begin in 2003. For decades, the region has been a chessboard for global powers, with oil, geopolitics, and ideology at the heart of the struggle. But the 2003 invasion of Iraq marked a turning point. Under the pretext of eliminating weapons of mass destruction and toppling Saddam Hussein, the U.S. launched one of the most controversial wars in modern history. In the sands of the Middle East, wars are not just fought with weapons, but with ideologies, histories, and the lives of countless innocents. In the early 2000s, the world stood at a crossroads. The September 11th, 2001 attacks had shaken the United States to its core, leaving nearly 3,000 dead and redefining the nation's sense of security. The Bush administration responded with the War on Terror, a sweeping, global campaign to eliminate threats before they could reach American soil again. Much more complex and layered. First, there was oil. Iraq, sitting atop some of the largest reserves in the world, had always been a focal point of global geopolitics. Control over the region's energy resources was seen as critical to maintaining U.S. influence on the global stage. Second, the neoconservative ideology that dominated the Bush administration believed in reshaping the Middle East. Figures like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz envisioned a new Iraq, a democratic ally in the heart of the Arab world that could inspire similar transformations in neighboring countries. They argued that removing Saddam would not only protect U.S. interests, but also bring stability and modernization to the region. And third, there was unfinished business. Saddam had been a thorn in America's side since the Gulf War in 1991. Many in Washington viewed her continued defiance, especially of the weapons of mass destruction allegations, as a humiliation that needed to be corrected. To rally support for the invasion, the Bush administration presented its case to the world. In a dramatic address to the United Nations in February 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell displayed satellite images and audio recordings, claiming they were proof of Iraq's clandestine weapons of mass programs. The phrase mushroom cloud was repeatedly used in speeches, invoking fears of nuclear devastation. However, many questioned the evidence. UN weapons inspectors, led by Hans Blix, reported that they found no conclusive proof of active weapons of mass programs in Iraq. Despite these warnings, the U.S. pushed forward, insisting that inaction was too great a risk. By late 2002, it was no longer a secret that the United States was preparing for military intervention in Iraq. However, the scale and scope of the operation would make it one of the largest U.S. military campaigns since the Cold War. To achieve this, a massive logistical and strategic planning process was set into motion. The operation's goal was clear: a swift and decisive victory. This strategy relied on the doctrine of shock and awe, which aimed to overwhelm Iraq with an intense and rapid show of force. The objective was not only to cripple Iraq's military capabilities, but also to psychologically disarm. Thus, the so-called coalition of the willing was formed, with the United Kingdom as its most significant partner. Other countries, such as Australia, Poland, and Spain, also pledged varying levels of support. Despite this coalition, the war was highly controversial on the global stage. Key allies such as France and Germany opposed the intervention, and the United Nations failed to provide a resolution explicitly authorizing the use of force. Regardless, the U.S. pressed forward, relying on its coalition partners to bolster its military and political efforts. Months before the invasion, the U.S. military began deploying forces to the Middle East. By early 2003, over 150,000 American troops were stationed in Kuwait, along with tens of thousands of coalition forces. Military bases and staging areas across the Gulf region were strengthened to support the campaign. The logistics behind this operation were monumental. Tanks, helicopters, and heavy artillery were transported across oceans. Supply chains were established to ensure troops had access to food, ammunition, and medical support. Advanced technology such as GPS-guided munitions and precision airstrikes was integrated into the plan to minimize collateral damage and maximize efficiency. One of the defining aspects of the preparation was the confidence, or perhaps overconfidence, of U.S. military planners. Officials believed the war would be over within weeks and that American forces would be greeted as liberators. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld famously predicted that the war would cost less than $50 billion and require minimal troop commitments after the initial invasion. This optimism shaped every aspect of the preparation, from troop numbers to post-war plans. However, it also meant that critical risks, such as sectarian divisions, insurgency potential, and the challenges of nation building, were underestimated or outright ignored. On March 20th, 2003, the United States, backed by its coalition partners, launched Operation Iraqi Freedom, marking the start of the invasion of Iraq. The campaign began with the infamous shock and awe strategy, a relentless and overwhelming aerial bombardment designed to cripple Saddam Hussein's military infrastructure and destroy the Iraqi regime's will to resist. The skies over Baghdad lit up with fire and explosions as more than 1,700 coalition aircraft targeted government buildings, communication hubs, and military installations. The intensity of the bombardment was meant to send a clear message. Resistance was futile. Within hours, Saddam's forces were in disarray, with many units abandoning their positions or surrendering outright. Simultaneously, coalition ground forces began their rapid advance. More than 150,000 U.S. and British troops crossed into Iraq from Kuwait, supported by a mechanized arsenal of tanks, helicopters, and heavy artillery. On April 9, 2003, less than a month after the invasion began, Baghdad fell to coalition forces. In a now iconic moment, U.S. soldiers and Iraqi civilians worked together to topple a statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square, symbolizing the end of his regime. Saddam himself had vanished, going into hiding as the U.S. military searched for him. His government was effectively dismantled, and Iraqi forces were either defeated, surrendered, or deserted. The initial phase of the invasion had achieved its primary objective, the removal of Saddam Hussein from power. While the military operation was a success in terms of speed and execution, it came at a significant cost. The relentless bombing campaigns devastated Iraq's infrastructure. Roads, bridges, power plants, and water systems were left in ruins. Hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties, and civilians bore the brunt of the destruction. The invasion also triggered widespread looting and lawlessness. Government buildings, museums, and even hospitals were ransacked, with little to no intervention from coalition forces. The U.S. military, focused on achieving military objectives, had no clear plan to maintain order in the aftermath of Saddam's fall. By May 1, 2003, President George W. Bush declared the end of major combat operations in Iraq with his infamous mission accomplished speech. Yet, even as the coalition celebrated, the seeds of a much larger conflict were already being sown. They faced challenges they were unprepared for: a growing insurgency, deepening sectarian divides, and the monumental task of nation building in a fractured society. What followed would define the modern history of the Middle East and reshape America's role in the world. What began as a mission to bring freedom and democracy to the Middle East ended in chaos, division, and tragedy. The invasion of Iraq toppled a dictator, but it also dismantled the nation's fragile infrastructure, leaving a power vacuum that spiraled into violence and instability. Instead of fostering democracy, the war fractured Iraq along sectarian lines, igniting a civil war that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Instead of reducing terrorism, it gave rise to new, more brutal organizations like ISIS. And instead of stabilizing the region, the invasion became a catalyst for decades of unrest, spreading conflict across the Middle East. For the people of Iraq, the promise of liberation was overshadowed by years of bloodshed, displacement, and loss. For the United States and its allies, the war left scars, both moral and material, shaking trust, draining resources, and challenging the narrative of intervention as a tool for peace. The legacy of the Iraq War is not one of victory, but of lessons. The cost of misjudgment, the consequences of hubris, and the enduring pain of a region reshaped not by liberation, but by conflict. 2 decades later, the echoes of this war still reverberate across the Middle East and beyond, a reminder of how the pursuit of freedom can sometimes lead to its opposite.